All right, well, hello everyone. Glad you have made it back to episode 2 of the Vietnam War.
Yes.
Well, gosh, we've talked a lot in our last episode talking about kind of the background to Vietnam, a little bit of the build-up to how Americans get involved with the French occupation, Japanese occupation, French occupation part 2, and then moving into kind of how how America gets in.
The trickle.
Yes.
The trickle of supplies and things that start, and then of course advisors and things that start coming to South Vietnam. Well, now we're going to turn on the fire hose.
Oh, for sure, for sure. And what really, what we really see beginning happening in roughly November, early November of '63.
Yes.
Is the unfortunate, well, I wouldn't say maybe as unfortunate as others would say, but the unfortunate assassination and then a coup of the Diem regime.
Him and his brother are both killed.
Yes, and this is just something that is eventually going to happen. There was so much unrest under the Diem.
They're obviously at this stage losing the war.
Oh yes,
because the Americans are saying more and more money, more and more weapons, more and more people,
and nothing is actually.
It's not really changing because I mean the Diem government, they're literally selling helicopters out from under people.
Yeah,
it's hard to have any morale as a member of the ARVN.
Right. Because
you just don't trust the guys back in headquarters.
Yeah, right.
They don't have your best interests at heart.
No.
At heart at all.
No.
And so Diem is assassinated. I'd say, 90% chance the CIA did it?
Yep.
Okay.
Probably so.
But anyway, the claim is it's a group of generals stage a coup,
assassinate
the two guys, and then by June, Von Tu becomes the president. But, not that important.
No, no. But what we will find is just about, 2 months later, in August of 1964.
Yes, after he becomes president.
Yes, after Lyndon Johnson.
Well, Johnson becomes president in
November of '63, but
August of '64
is a major turning point in how America gets involved even further into this situation in Vietnam.
Yeah. Oh, it is the trigger.
Yes.
It is the remember the Maine.
Right.
They bombed Pearl Harbor.
Right.
Remember the Alamo battle
cry. Whatever the case
may be.
Well,
that's what the Johnson administration would want you to believe.
Right. And what we find, of course, is this incident, is this idea, or the event that takes place in the Gulf of Tonkin, which the Gulf of Tonkin is in the northern portion of Vietnam.
Yeah, it's the kind of the divot at the top where Haiphong, which is not that far from Hanoi.
Right. Right. And so the story goes is that the USS Maddox is in the area of the Gulf of Tonkin, and there is a North Vietnamese patrol in this same area. And
it's called a freedom of navigation exercise, is what the Navy claims. Realistically, they were probably on an intelligence gathering mission.
Correct.
Of some sort. We don't know exactly what.
Now, if you believe what you believe, some would say that there was a torpedo attack by the North Vietnamese on the Maddox. Others would say there may have been just a miscommunication of what was going on. Regardless of it, it's
in the grand scheme of the Cold War, these confrontations between, say, Russian and American naval vessels was not unusual.
Right.
About every 5 or 6 years, there'd actually be at least a collision of some sort. Nothing major, but enough to damage a couple ships and really get everybody blood pressures
spiking up.
Get them up good. And, especially once we go to H-bomb and
oh my gosh,
mutually assured destruction.
Yes.
Every time there's a clash, which is where a war like Vietnam comes in, is that ability to, channel that aggression into a third party.
Well, and that's definitely at the proxy wars of the Cold War. I mean, even if you want to think about it, Korea was a proxy war. Vietnam, of course, a major proxy war. But when we finally see this Gulf of Tonkin incident the American.
I mean, the details are so muddy
Oh my
as
gosh,
to be
yes.
useless.
You don't know exactly what happened. You don't know who said what or what actually did occur. But the thing is the aftermath of it.
Yeah, Johnson goes to the Congress.
And he says, listen, we have this incident that took place in North Vietnamese waters. Well, maybe not in their waters,
in
but
their historical waters, which the
Yes.
United States Navy has always maintained, and the United States, by extension,
yes.
has always maintained the 3-mile limit.
Right.
So if I'm 50 miles inside of the Gulf of Tonkin, or the Gulf of Sidra for Libya,
Sure.
or the Persian Gulf for Iran,
Mhm.
they consider those territorial waters. We do not, because they're far enough from the coast.
Right.
But, yeah.
But what we see is, of course, this resolution passed by Congress.
Oh my gosh. I don't know why they just don't call it the blank check.
And that's what I call it. When I teach American history and we talk Vietnam,
Oh.
that's what I call it. It's called a blank check resolution because literally it gave Johnson
The ability
to
to
do whatever.
prosecute a war.
Exactly. He was the one who could sit in the Oval Office and say, okay, I want troops to move here, and I want this number of troops in this area. It was America's first war.
It was the first war run by
the
people
White House.
who weren't there,
Yeah.
weren't in theater.
Right. I mean, yes, General Westmoreland was there from the beginning, but again, he's taking the orders from Johnson in his resolution that he had gotten passed.
But as we see, the obsession Johnson has with the war in
Oh
Vietnam
my
grows
gosh.
and grows till I think even he realizes that he's unelectable. Well, that's of course for later,
Yes,
but
for
still,
later, but
still, when you see the mismanagement from the Pentagon and from the White House
oh my gosh,
of a
yeah.
war literally 10,000 miles away, trying to dictate to troops on the ground what's going on when they can see with their own eyes that's not what's happening. But
Right.
you know, the early part of the war, one of my favorite books is called Brennan's War. It's written by a guy who was there, 64, 65.
Uh-huh.
As he called it, Terry and the Pirates,
Huh.
because he was special forces. So they're out there doing crazy stuff.
Sure.
And it just was a different feel, because he comes back later in like 69, and it's just
It's
a different.
totally,
The U.S. forces have different morale. The whole war is different. But anyway,
Yeah.
there's this. Well, Americans are coming in here with a boatload of confidence.
Well, they think, okay, hey, we're the top dog in this
yeah.
area.
Well, we're bigger, we're badder. We haven't ever lost.
Right.
I mean,
Foreshadowing much?
yeah. Well, I mean, literally, it is hubris.
Yes.
We think we can change the destiny of 60 million Vietnamese people by force of arms, and I mean, we do. We change a lot of people's destinies.
Yes.
Shallow graves and body bags.
Unfortunate.
Unfortunately. But after the Gulf of Tonkin resolution, he tells us that we're going to war, and we start with Marines go ashore at Da Nang.
Mhm.
That's a big televised happening. It's very reminiscent of when troops landed in Somalia
Right.
at the end of George H.W. Bush's time.
Yes.
Supposed to be in operation, and there's more press than Somalis.
Right. But the thing that, and if you ever get the opportunity to see Ken Burns' docuseries, The Vietnam War, or really any footage from Da Nang,
The History Channel had a really
Yeah.
good Vietnam in HD, which is really good. It's a lot more personal. I mean, it gives you the background, but it's got a lot of personal stuff, which is good, and some really awesome home movies that you don't see in typical Vietnam movies,
Right.
or documentaries even.
Right.
So,
But the idea of these Marines coming onto Da Nang, and there's Vietnamese women, and they're putting leis on their
it was
necks,
much more of a photo op than an
Exactly.
operation.
Exactly. Which,
But Da Nang becomes an important Marine base, air
Yeah,
base.
right.
I mean, it's big.
right, and again, we're increasing our troop sizes. We are going from, just advisors before 1962, 1963 to now putting the
We're
boots
going
on
to
the
put
ground.
combat troops.
Yep, we're going to put boots on the ground. We're going to put them into South Vietnam to now try and deal with this Viet Cong North Vietnamese situation.
Yeah, I can't remember. At some point, advisors were allowed to be armed. And I can't remember if that was the end of the Eisenhower or the beginning of the Kennedy administration. They changed the rules of engagement for advisors in the field.
I would assume it would probably be the end of the Eisenhower
Because
administration.
we started losing guys.
Yes.
And so they kind of like the idea of shooting back.
Yes. Right.
Everybody likes that idea.
Right. And so again, you also see more support coming from the north.
Way north.
Yeah, way north, way north. We're talking China, we're talking Soviet Union. The Politburo in the Soviet Union has...
Well, here's a chance for the Soviets and the Chinese in the grand scheme of the Cold War to distract America and have it waste blood and treasure on a war that ultimately to the Chinese and the Soviets means nothing.
Well, and in their idea, I think they're thinking also, hey, this is ultimately just a civil war.
Yeah, really it is.
Why is this grand army of the United States getting involved in what is essentially a civil war?
Well, I think Chinese thinking is very similar to they had in Korea.
Right.
They don't care about Korea one whit, really.
No, they don't.
But they couldn't handle the idea of an American puppet, as they see it, in South Korea becoming all of Korea.
It makes sense.
On their border. Same thing
very,
for Vietnam.
Yeah.
The idea that suddenly you'd have a couple 100-mile border with an ally of the United States, I think
it's big.
Bothered them a lot.
Right. And so, again, with just the understanding that, again, Ho Chi Minh being even though he's a Chinese communist, he's a communist. So the Russians are going to throw their support towards him.
Vietnamese communist.
Right. But what we eventually will find is the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong, they're not playing around. They don't
Viet
just
Cong,
sit there.
Oh, no. They're vicious, especially towards civilians, which tells you a lot of their discipline and their morality.
Yeah.
I mean, they have no problem killing teachers, doctors,
anyone who
mayors.
is, yeah.
I mean, anybody who's even remotely active in teaching. I mean, they kill nuns.
Right.
They don't have any.
There's no remorse.
No.
There's no sense of well, you know, they are technically
Non-combatants.
It doesn't matter. You're teaching the wrong thing, so we're going to kill you.
Right.
But again, this now is leading on to American troops.
Now Americans, of course, well, we're up to March of '65.
Yeah, by about March of '65, we start to see...
Now, right after Tonkin, we did some airstrikes in the north.
Yes.
Lost a couple airplanes.
And that's where we find the first of these
POWs. First POW.
I cannot remember the exact name.
Alvarez is his last name. I can't remember his
Alvarez.
first name.
But there were about 2 or 3 of them that were taken over in North Vietnam, and they were not technically treated as prisoners of war in the beginning.
No.
It wasn't until after that Gulf of Tonkin resolution in, I want to say, August.
I mean,
yeah.
But I mean, honestly, what is the Gulf of Tonkin resolution other than a declaration of war?
It is.
On at least the VC.
Yes.
If not the North itself.
Right. It eventually morphs into the North.
Yeah, well,
as well, but...
Well, anyway, the Viet Cong finally attack Americans on purpose. Now, Americans had been getting killed.
Yes.
For a while.
Crossfire.
Not great in number, but if you're out there leading troops, you're going to get shot at.
Yeah.
And bad things happen.
It's just inevitable.
But, what was it? Do you have the date there? I can't remember the date.
Gosh, I cannot remember.
Was it February?
Yes, I believe it was February or March.
February, it's February. Because there's
March.
a response.
Right.
But in February of '65, they attacked Pleiku, a U.S. compound.
Not a South Vietnamese, not an ARVN, but a U.S.
Right. One with only the American flag on the top.
Yeah.
And a nearby helicopter base, Camp Holloway.
Mm-hmm.
And inflict some damage and some casualties, of course, because that's what attacks do.
Yeah, right.
And Johnson responds by Operation Flaming Dart, which is the first real air campaign in the North.
Yes.
And, it doesn't last very long.
No.
Because, of course, we haven't built up our air forces in the area to really sustain along. But that's what provides the impetus for the next group. We start pushing aircraft in, which means more troops are needed to protect the aircraft.
Correct.
And it's just tail wagging the dog kind of thing. We want to bomb them, but to bomb them, we have to have things. So we start flying our B-52s from Okinawa, from Manila, from Guam, and flying them into the combat zone and back out. And we got Namsu Air Base in Thailand. We discovered that it's almost impossible over the course of the war to protect these air bases all the time perfectly.
Right.
And so even though, of course, we have a lot of helicopters and smaller aircraft, the big hitters, the F-105s, the B-52s, things like that, all are out of country typically.
Sure. And eventually, after Flaming Dart, we will see the beginnings of what will become Operation Rolling Thunder.
Rolling Thunder, which is huge for, what, 3 years?
Yeah, it lasts 3 years.
But it's fighting a war with your foot in a bucket.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Because you've got these huge limitations on where you can bomb, when you can bomb. And the enemy figures out these limitations really quickly.
And because we're not targeting specific groups of people, we're targeting bridges, we're targeting roadways,
railroads. But we can't go into, I mean, we do go into Hanoi and Haiphong every once in a while, but the exclusion zones are large.
Yes, they are.
Oh, what's the name? Flight of the Intruder.
Oh, yeah.
That's based. The book's based on the Vietnam War. Basically, it's a fantasy of a Navy pilot who finally gets tired of having all his buddies get shot down and flies down and bombs the the People's Congress building
oh my gosh,
in Hanoi.
Really? Wow.
But it's something that we would never allow.
No, of course not.
It was very obvious we're only going to be fighting this war to prevent a military takeover of the South. And so, all of a sudden, these guys getting ready to brief the air cruiser, putting X's through all these locations.
Can't hit this,
bomb.
can't hit that, can't hit this.
And, talk about a need for precision munitions.
And we had none of that.
We didn't have a lot of that stuff yet. Our laser-guided bombs were at their infancy at this point.
I mean, we're talking using napalm in a lot of areas.
I mean, we had all sorts of cool things we could do, but we weren't to the point like we were in the Gulf War, where we're literally shooting into you pick the window of the building.
Exactly.
It wasn't just the building; it's the whole window.
Yeah. Just
I want that one. Room 207, please.
Yes. But the idea is also, it coincides with how not only does the air war not really become an effective means of fighting, it makes it more difficult for the ground troops as well, because the landscape of Vietnam is not something we're used to.
No, it's. I mean, areas of it are
sure.
Like the area we see in Drang.
Yeah.
It's not very different than Missouri. It's more of a forest than a jungle.
Right.
It's got open areas, hills. I mean, but when you get down south, especially,
yes,
you start looking at its rice paddies, jungles, lots and lots of streams and rivers.
Right.
But anyway, after Rolling Thunder really gets kicked off, and then the Marines launch their first offensive.
Right.
Starbright.
Right. Starlight. Sorry, Starlight.
My bad. I was thinking Starlight, Starbright.
Right. But Operation Starlight, 5,500 Marines.
So a regiment, basically.
Right, a regiment of Marines going after the Viet Cong.
Yes.
This is a big operation early in the war to prevent the Viet Cong from trying to infiltrate in the South. But
well, I mean, it's effective in the sense that it forces this VC regiment to disperse.
Right.
But it doesn't create the death toll that they were. I mean, honestly, and this is going to become probably the biggest issue with the war as we move forward. Starlight is not as effective as we would like it to be because the Marines are not very mobile. They're foot mobile.
Right, definitely.
They're not deploying helicopter troops. They're not driving tanks everywhere. That's the Army's job.
Yeah. Marines are...
I mean, they do have armored vehicles. They do have artillery. And they do, whenever they can get the VC either trapped or on ground they feel like they have to defend, the artillery and the air power just annihilate large numbers of them. But
It only happens every
It
once in
doesn't,
a while.
you know, you have a whole brigade running around or a regiment running around trying to do stuff, and it's just not as effective as we'd hope. It's not like the Marines fighting Germans or Japanese.
Right.
We just can't unleash the firepower like we'd like to.
Exactly.
Because, again, theoretically, we're in here fighting to win hearts and minds.
Yeah.
Trying to actually save the South Vietnamese from the North.
Right. Which effectively what we are doing is...
Well, I mean, at the initial, this phase of the war, we're doing okay because we're really limiting our troops.
Yes,
what they
true,
can do.
true.
You know, they're not going to go bomb a village just because a guy shoots at them from there. We're still in that, we can fight this out.
Yeah.
It's going to take a couple years for morale to drop that far.
Right.
But then we deploy our buddies, the 7th Cavalry, the 1st Air Cav Division.
Right, because again, we're now moving into an air-powered army.
Well, it's a new idea.
Yeah.
Nobody's really ever tried helicopter-based. We've used them in little unit stuff. In Korea even.
Yeah.
You know, but Korean war air helicopters couldn't carry more than 4 or 5 people, including the pilot. So,
so
they weren't horribly effective.
Think MASH.
Yeah, well, exactly. You don't have too many helicopters that can carry more than 3 or 4 adult males.
Right.
So you load people down with combat gear and stuff, and now you're down to 2 or 3. And now, luckily, Vietnam's lower than a lot of Korea.
Right, for sure.
So you get better air velocity from thicker air, but you need to. But we've had advances.
Oh, major advances.
Especially the UH-1 Iroquois, which becomes called the Huey. And it can carry, what, 7 guys, 8 guys in the back, effectively?
Yes.
So, I mean, 2 of them, well, 4 of them can land a typical platoon. A platoon's got more guys, but most platoons don't run at full strength, especially in a combat zone.
Right.
So you're literally, you can land a fairly significant number of troops anywhere you want within a short period of time.
Right, an LZ.
As long as you have a wide enough space to put troops in, helicopters into.
Yeah.
And so the first Air Cav goes out there and they figure out where some bad guys are.
Yes.
And so they land in the Ia Drang Valley, or the Ya Drang, depending on who you talk to. And it's a nightmare because the LZ's small, so you're shuffling guys in. And if you've ever seen We Were Soldiers, that's just a really good retelling.
Right. It's literally a constant stream.
Well, you have this constant stream because you only have so many helicopters, they can only carry so many men. You're only bringing in less than 100 guys every wave, and it's an hour round trip.
Right.
So, it takes a while, but of course, you get to pick where you're at.
That's a good point.
So the enemy has to react to you, which gives you time to get more waves in. And it just, as you see the battle develop, you're like, okay, the Americans have this area, and then this White Star Division comes down off the mountain. Okay, large hill.
Yeah, right. Yeah. let's be honest. It's not really a mountain.
Not what we would consider a mountain.
No.
But anyway, and this battle rages for 3 days.
Right.
I mean, and it is a literal example of American firepower at its best. It's, the Alamo, it's the Battle of the Bulge, it's every schoolboy's dream from the movies, kind of writ large. Here we are fighting for our lives. We have nowhere to go. We can't retreat.
No, of course not.
Because, well, it takes too long to get us out.
Yeah. Where are you going to go? How are you going to get out?
After day 2, when things get really, really hairy, and they call Broken Arrow, which means something different now.
Right.
But then it was just units being threatened to overrun.
Right.
And so they bring in every bit of air power, which is a lot. You got 2 or 3 aircraft carriers offshore. You've got the air base at Da Nang. You've got one down by Saigon. They are just bringing in everything.
They're bringing the heat.
And just blow. I mean, and the thing is this is exactly the tactic that the Army uses from that point forward to a lot of extents. Go into places the VC can't let you stay, make them come to you to fight, and then deploy the artillery and the air power to wipe them out.
Destroy them, yes.
Because territory means nothing, which I would disagree, because how do you win hearts and minds if people are never safe?
True.
I think we missed a piece of the puzzle.
I agree.
I think we concentrated so much on the blowing them up
that we forgot to talk to the guys.
That we missed the chance to maybe isolate regions and turn them into prosperous, safe, pacified areas.
Yeah.
Now that was difficult because it's hard to control.
Well, especially since, and by the nighttime, you would have the VC come in, resupply, gain more ground, do everything that needs to be done,
kill
and then,
people,
and turn those who might have helped the Americans. Well, of course they helped the Americans. Boom, they're done. There's no doubt about it.
Right. Or and it's just from this point on, especially, this becomes America's War, which is a comment from that book and movie. And it's, I don't know, the documentary, the history of the Vietnam War in HD really talks about the fact that this is what skews America's involvement in the war, because we start worrying more about body count than taking ground. Well, taking ground was just utterly meaningless because the VC don't care.
Right.
In general.
No.
Obviously they do if you're going after one of their supply centers or their headquarters sections. That's when they would get fights, real fights.
Sure.
But we only see 2 or 3 of those a year, really. Whereas Knockdown Dragon, Hamburger Hill, Hill 875, Drang.
Right.
We just don't see that many of those circumstances because the VC are a guerrilla movement. They know they can't stand up to the Americans in a knockdown, drag-out fight.
No, of course not.
I mean, even platoon on a platoon, they just don't have the weaponry to take on Marines, and they don't have the training.
No.
But they know that much, which means they're better trained than they could be.
Right.
I mean, honestly.
You're right. You're right.
They know when to run away. That's important.
That's huge.
And especially since their mission isn't to take ground either.
No, their mission is to
win hearts and minds.
Yes.
Through fear and intimidation.
Exactly. But again, like what you just mentioned, the body counts. Early on, again, Westmoreland, and to even further extent, Johnson, wanted this to be a war of attrition.
Well, we knew that was the only way. We needed to make it so expensive that they would get their hands off.
Right.
Honestly, it was the Viet Minh's strategy against the French.
True.
Don't take prisoners. Kill as many Frenchmen as you can so they quit coming.
Right.
That nobody wants to get on a boat and come to Saigon because they might not come home.
Well, eventually that's what happens.
Exactly, that's what happens. And so the Americans are really just flipping that idea right back on them and say, if we can make the North bleed enough, they'll eventually give up. And we'll talk about how that works in the next couple episodes. As we move deeper into this war, things are going to change dramatically.
For sure.
But after Drang, well, before even Drang, Johnson had already doubled the draft.
Right. By July of '65, the number of
doubled
troops.
From 17,500, 35,000 new draftees every month.
That's an amazing number.
Well, yeah, you think that's 400,000 a year basically now.
Yep.
Instead of 200,000.
Yep.
Now, granted, our military at this time though is
very
3 to 4 million
because
we're all over the place.
Yeah, it's true.
I mean, we need a lot of guys.
We do. We do. I agree.
We got troops in Germany. We've got troops in Japan and Korea and now Vietnam.
Yep.
And so we need to increase the draft, which, of course, heightens resistance. I don't think there's ever, other than World War II, and I'm not even sure about that really, because if you read in between the lines in the news, I don't know that there's ever been a draft in America that wasn't protested.
Good point. And I bet money, even in World War II, we still had somewhat of a resistance in the fighting.
Especially before the war began. After Pearl Harbor, probably not.
Boom, you didn't need it.
But the Conscription Act of 1940,
you were like, no.
I think there's some people that were not very pleased that they were going to get yanked off the farm and put in uniform.
Yeah.
And so when we see these earlier draft protests and the protests against the war in Vietnam, you know, it's kind of weird because these people seem like tinfoil hat wearers to the American public because most of them don't even know about the Vietnam War. They hear about it occasionally on the news.
Yeah.
Drang it's big.
Right. True.
You know, obviously the landing at Da Nang is big. And then, of course, you have the reports about Rolling Thunder. But because that the reality of the war, despite the fact that the war is literally getting piped into living rooms,
Yeah.
the disconnect of the reality of the war is a very strange beast. I guess it speaks a lot to the management of press relations that we learned, obviously, when you see the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War.
Right.
Embedded reporters who know what actually went on before the soundbite hit.
Right.
And when they're writing their books and they're telling their deep stories on 60 Minutes, you get a bigger picture. You don't really get a lot of that with Vietnam.
No.
What you see is what shocks you.
Right. Exactly.
And so, I think that's important to remember. But yeah, to the American people, people protesting outside the Pentagon about a war that doesn't even involve that many guys. And, of course, the boogeyman is present. Communist.
Right.
What happens if South Vietnam falls?
Then,
And honestly, looking at it from a human aspect, knowing what I know about history, the concept of letting any nation fall under communist rule is tantamount to saying, I don't care who dies.
Yeah.
Because there's always millions of dead.
Right.
Doesn't matter the country.
Exactly.
They're going to start slaughtering people who disapprove of them or disagree with them or just happen to be people they don't like. Pick a communist country other than maybe Yugoslavia, and I'm sure if we ask the Croats, they'll tell you a different story.
Yeah, for sure.
Albania, maybe?
Maybe.
But I'm sure there are
But
plenty of people in political prisons too.
Sure.
But everywhere you see the communist hammer and sickle fly, there's going to be a body count.
Huge body count, yes.
And it's going to be anybody, not soldiers, it's anybody.
It's
So
teachers, yeah.
the idea that Americans would
Care
maybe
so
not
much.
rally around the flag like Pearl Harbor
Right.
or anything like that,
But they
be
still
willing
care.
to serve because this is important.
Right.
We don't like communists. We know what they do.
Right.
Because we've already seen, Stalin in the 30s.
Yeah.
We've seen the Cultural Revolution in the 50s in China.
You're starting to see a little bit of that in Cuba
Yes.
by 1961,
Well, you already see that with
62.
the boat people start almost
Mhm.
immediately, and they just get famous in the 70s. But,
Yeah.
the people that are doing anything they can to get out of these countries, and they're telling people what's actually happening, but nobody listens.
Right.
They don't listen to the fact that they just took my school teacher and my priest and my mayor, who's, my cousin,
Right.
and just took them out and shot them
Right.
because they're not communists.
Right.
And so, at this point in the war, there's not a lot of resistance. It's just people. I don't even want to call. I wouldn't want to say that they're on the far left. I don't think they would even fit that category.
No.
They have a variety of reasons. In fact, you probably see people that would be considered libertarians, especially given the draft. Libertarians are notoriously against the draft.
Right.
So, at this point in the war, I don't know that the opposition is so much to protecting South Vietnam. I think it's to the means that we're going about it.
Exactly.
The draft, especially.
Exactly. Yeah. Get rid of the draft.
Right. They don't like the draft. Oh, but we'd already had the draft. It wasn't like we were instituting a draft. We were just ramping it up.
Right.
You didn't have that chance to avoid it like you did all through the 50s.
That's true. Well, I think that's a good place for us to
That
stop.
is a good place. Because after Drang, the war changes. It escalates fast.
Definitely.
Fast.
And again, that's where we'll pick up when we get into, about
65, 66.
Into 65.
Good year,
into
66.
Yeah, this guy. And then move on into kind of just how the war progresses from there and move into, again, just the debacle of the war. So please make sure you join us next time and take care.